In this video, we will be exploring oppression in society and how oppression is perpetuated and continued via societal norms and structures. Therefore, we will be using a structural determinist framework to analyze discourses that harm oppressed groups, the practices and policies due to the aforementioned discourses, and the outcomes of those policies and practices. The structural determinist framework will be applied to ableism, sexism, homophobia, and classism in this video. Therefore, it is important to remember intersectionality and how oppression compounds, resulting in, for example, a black woman being more oppressed than a white woman, as she would be marginalized for both her race and gender. Now, if we begin with ableism in the article The Disabled Self by Susan Gregory, it is explained that societal norms harm disabled people by categorizing them in terms of what they cannot do instead of what they can. A discourse from the disabled self could be that disabled people are deficient or lacking in ability and need to be fixed to fit social norms. A practice that arises due to forcing societal norms on disabled people could be the stunting of deaf children's development by forcing them to learn lip reading and vocal communication rather than sign language. This practice would then lead to deaf children failing to learn proper communication skills, resulting in a lack of social skills and opportunities in the future. When applying structural determinism to sexism, the article Why Patriarchy by Ellen G. Johnson highlights a discourse known as essentialism. Essentialism is the theory that there are essential biological differences between a group, such as men and women, making women more subservient, weaker, or less intelligent, and men stronger, more dominant, and more logical. As Johnson highlights, essentialism leads to boys will be boys ideology, which excuses aggressive or violent behavior, and more recently is connected to the perpetuation of things like dismissing domestic abuse and rape culture. The perpetuation of rape culture and the acceptance of violence against women leads to women feeling unsafe living their day-to-day lives. When it comes to homophobia, the Saskatoon website has some fantastic resources discussing how non-queer people and heteronormative social structures oppress queer people. However, there's also discrimination within the queer community, as there are so many queer identities, which leads to some queer people disregarding particular identities as fake or not gay enough. If you apply homophobia to the structural determinist framework, a possible discourse could be that queer people are perverted, morally corrupt, or want to make other people queer. Discourses about queer people being perverted and wanting to make other people queer leads to practices such as queer bashing and violence against queer people, like Efdt Saskatoon mentions, as well as the recent Floridian Don't Say Gay bill, which will limit queer topics from being taught or supported in Floridian schools as they are deemed inappropriate. Unsurprisingly, these practices and policies then lead to violence against queer people, bullying for queer youth, and the increased rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide among queer people. Finally, I would like to discuss classism in regards to structural determinist framework. An important article to look at when discussing classism is John Swanson's What Poor People Say About Poor Bashing, which examines discourses such as people on welfare and homeless people being thought of as lazy, morally corrupt, and drug/alcohol abusers. Painting poor people negatively then leads to practices like poor bashing and violence against poor people, as mentioned in Swanson's article. It also diverts all blame onto the poor people themselves instead of the government programs that are inadequate or the corporations that pay low wages to their employees. The idea that poor people are lazy, substance abusers, or morally inferior then leads to people viewing poor people as deserving of their poverty. After all, there must be something wrong with the poor people rather than the systems that keep people poor and rich people rich. Social hierarchies and inequalities get produced in society via social, political, and economic structures that are put in place to benefit one group even at the behest of another. Social issues like ableism, sexism, homophobia, and classism are produced in society through implicit bias, media representation, perpetuation of social norms, lack of education, and a desire to maintain the status quo. For many, it is easier to ignore or accept inequalities that do not directly affect them. It is even easier to ignore inequalities if you benefit from the oppressive system. Therefore, critical analysis of social issues is vital for working through and trying to help lessen oppression in society.